Hi, my name is Carol.
My name is Hasna, and we are Current Harmony Connections.
Current Harmony Connections is an online community organization that aims to raise awareness to the challenges we currently face in society, helping educate people so they can make a positive impact in their communities.
Speaking Volumes is our first panel discussion and interview event, and our topics are Asian empowerment, Muslim empowerment, Black empowerment, women empowerment, navigating COVID, and mental health.
Be sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up to our videos.
Please follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram. The links will be in the description box below.
We hope you enjoy our panel discussions and interviews. Started.
So first, we would like you to introduce yourself, give a small bio, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. I am Zoe Share. I am the CEO of Schmooze Media, which is a social marketing agency located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I can tell you more about what a CEO of Schmooze Media does if you'd like.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sure. So I started Schmooze just over 6 years ago now. And so my definition of CEO has changed many times over the years as I've grown and evolved myself as an individual and as a business owner. So what I do now is I am the big boss lady, the final decision maker on our product growth, our overall direction. I make sure that everyone on my team is supported, has the ability to tell me what they're struggling with, what their victories have been, and just overall big vision and growth, and saying this is the direction we need to head in based on all of these things that I'm collecting, all this information I'm collecting and bridging and analyzing and overanalyzing. So that's what my life is like now.
So explain how you've impacted the community and what you have done so far, more so during COVID.
Okay, cool. So when I started Schmooze 6 years ago, I had just graduated from my master's in business, and I thought to myself, I've never worked for another marketing agency, but it sounds not good. And while I don't really know what that means, I think there has to be a better way. So I'm just going to figure that out and just do good work for good people. And I didn't really think I was going to be some big agency that would compete with the big fancy agencies. But what I learned is that there were a lot of people out there who thought it needed to be done in a better way. So I just started building and creating a community around that shared vision. So during COVID, what really happened was I had the opportunity to say, how do I go back to that person I was 6 years ago, who believed there was a better way and believed that there was an opportunity to work with good people and to make good things happen? And how am I going to keep applying that? And it really became very clear to me as a parent that, I wasn't going to focus my energy on my daughter. Choosing between keeping my business afloat and being there for my daughter 24/7 during COVID became a really big source of tension for me. And it was like, well, how can I feel proud of what I've done during this time? So this has been a very roundabout answer, but basically what happened is I wrote a children's book. And I felt like I don't have to make a decision this way. I can sit there playing, with my notebook in hand, thinking about a children's book. I'm reading with my daughter, thinking about what would my daughter, what can I create right now that my daughter would be proud of? And what can I create right now that lends itself to more opportunities for all the people in the world, which is ultimately what I care about the most. And so this book, which is called ABC Stay Home With Me, puts together 13 different Canadian illustrators' work. They each were responsible for 2 pages. And I co-wrote it with another wonderful woman in marketing named Gabriella Rakoff. And we sold the book. All the proceeds went to frontline workers. So I felt like I had created something that my daughter says, she now says, Mommy's book, Mommy's book. And I know that for the next 10, 20 years, that's something that's going to be really special between my daughter and I. And I've raised this money with the help of a beautiful community of creative people. And ultimately, it's helped my agency too, because it's been an embodiment of what I believe in. And, I can't speak for my team, but I think that they're proud that they have a CEO who thinks that creating something that adds value for frontline workers and adds value in the educational world, I think that means something to them about them showing up to work every day. So I just feel like it's going to pick up my dog. I think that I feel like I've, checked off all the boxes in doing that, in creating that book, in ways that I didn't even expect. And then through COVID, so that's like part one of my answer. Sorry, I'm a really long talker. That's why my company is called Schmooze. Talk is what that means. But essentially, so there was the book, and then I am on the founding team of an organization called the Homefront, which is also working on fundraising and putting together resources for frontline workers. So that's the second thing I've done during COVID. And then the third thing that's really changed during COVID is my business. So we've actually gotten bigger during this time, and so creating jobs for people because I have the opportunity to just continues to be something that motivates me when making decisions about how to grow my company. Like, is this a person that can help us grow so we can create more jobs for more creative, smart, entrepreneurial people who know that the world only has things to gain?
Yeah.
Like a dog this cute. So this has been a whirlwind couple of months for me, to be honest, but really, really clarifying in terms of what I want out of my career.
Yeah, definitely. I think this time that we're in quarantine has sort of given us more clarity, time to spend with our family, time to spend for ourselves, and it gives us clarity on what we want because we have so much time that we're at home.
We're actually thinking,
it's
taking time to pause. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's true, but I also feel like because I have a young child and a life partner, I often felt like I lost time for myself in all of this because I would have that 10-15 minute commute. That would be my alone time, my time to switch out of CEO mode and into mom mode. And when I lost that, and time sort of became meaningless. It wasn't clear when Zoe the mom started and Zoe the CEO started, and when Zoe the mom stopped and Zoe the CEO stopped. So it was really a matter of saying, like, okay, I've let myself burn out completely now. I've let myself write this book, try and make lemonade out of lemons, because creativity is the most important thing in times of hardship, in my opinion. And now I am so exhausted, and I've gained weight and my skin is broken out, and it's just sort of moving in and out of connecting with what you want and getting so sucked into surviving. That's sort of what I've gone back and forth between in these last couple of months. I think a lot of parents are in that same position.
So you've already touched on some of the challenges that you've gone, but what other challenges have you experienced because of COVID? Maybe more about your business, Schmooze. What challenges has that gone through?
Sure. So in the first month in March, I started, we were in a really great place in January, February. I was so excited. We had this, great amount of business in the pipeline. And I was like, this is the year. Like, I turned 30 last year, and I want this year to be the example of what the next 5 years are going to be like. I was really ready to grow and invest in the company and invest in the team. And so that March, which is really only 5 months ago, but feels like last year. In March, I came back from vacation early because we needed to get out of Florida and into Toronto. My daughter got sick. I lost about 50% of my business in those first couple of weeks of COVID because a lot of those businesses were panicking and sort of saying, put everything on pause. I don't know what's going to happen. So put our work order on pause. And then, so it was just like the lowest of the low in the first month because my daughter was sick. There were no COVID tests available. So we had just come back from the US and we didn't know if we were sick or not. My business was failing. And there was this day, very pivotal day in March that I remember. Justin Trudeau had announced that the wage subsidy was going to go from 10% to 75%. And 2 days before that announcement, I had said to my team, I'm probably going to have to do some layoffs because I don't know how we're going to do this because we've lost so much business. And then that thing happened, the 75%. And I was like, oh my God, that's going to save my runway from March. Because my biggest thing that I didn't want to do, I didn't want to lay people off, but I also didn't want to bleed my company dry. So you can pay people for a while, but if you have no cash flow after 3 months or 4 months, you really haven't set yourself up for long-term success. So a lot of businesses have had to do that. So that 75% wage subsidy, even if it was just for March, saved my cash flow. And then so that happened. And then oh gosh, it's such a blur almost. And then within, I don't know if it was 24 or 48 hours of that wage subsidy announcement, the phone started ringing. Clients were like, okay, we have a pivot plan. We need digital marketing desperately. So get how we put it on pause? Now put it back on go and times 3. So it went from we lost everything and I was struggling to breathe between my daughter not having childcare, her being sick. I don't know how I was writing this book at the same time. I think that was just my way of coping with the feeling that my business was going to be completely gone. And then within whatever it was, 48 hours, 72 hours, who even knows anymore, the phones were off the hook. And I had to say to people, okay, well, I'm not laying you off and we need to hire. And it was super scary because I didn't really know, is the revenue going to come through? Are people just saying that they're going to when you have predictive revenue for 6 years where you can sort of understand your patterns and understand the flow and trust that someone's going to sign up for a 6-month contract and continue for 6 months, that completely changed. The predictive analysis that have been able to do in the past has completely changed. Yeah. So there's just no predictability. Even now it's August and I'm what's going to happen in September? I could triple my business again, or the schools could shut down. Parents who thought they were about to have a break because their kids could go to school, suddenly those kids will be back again and every business will need to pause again. Who knows? Yeah. So it's just been learning to breathe when I'm able to and prepare myself that what happened in March might happen again. And so I need to create as much sustainability and as much predictability as I can within this world of uncertainty so that I can help everyone on my team know that they have a salary coming in. So I'm very motivated to make sure that I'm making extremely productive, sustainable decisions as a CEO.
So you've touched on some of the challenges you faced, both professionally and personally. So what would you say are some of the positives that you've actually experienced because of COVID?
I think I touched on it before, the clarity that I know who I am and what I believe in. And I can tell you what I believe in so much more confidently than I would have 6 months ago. I also feel much more confident about investing in my company, trusting myself as a leader. I think I've just grown astronomically as a young woman leader in this time. You know, when you're 25 and you start to think, why is anyone going to take me seriously? Or at least I thought that. And now I'm like, yeah, take me seriously.
Yeah.
I would say that what I feel so clear and confident about is that the businesses of the successful businesses of the future are the businesses that worry about profit and purpose.
Yeah.
So the businesses that are very profitable, they need to think about purpose. And the businesses that are very purpose to really understand and put a stake in the ground around my opinion, my strongly felt opinion that social enterprise is the future of business. And I don't really care about how you define social enterprise, you know, non-profit, charity, for-profit, but there's like all these different models of business. What I care about is that people realize that the opportunity to run a business is about creating value. And that value means creating a service or a product that helps their customer, but also that their business at large plays a role in how this world can be successful in terms of how we treat each other, how we give back to the most important issues. You know, right now, so many charities are responsible for the world's greatest problems. I don't think that's good enough. I mean, I could talk about how I think charity is broken for a long time. I think there's a lot of benefits to charity, but I think people writing a check and saying, here you go, charity, go ahead, fix everything. I don't think that's good enough. And I think I've learned that through writing the book, through working with the Homefront, and just also watching companies crumble in how they've responded to COVID, the way they treat their employees, and then how they've not known how to respond to the changing world in terms of systemic racism, systemic poverty, like all of these ridiculous cycles that need to be broken. These are all of our responsibility, not just a charity's responsibility.
Definitely. And so what challenges do you think we'll face post-COVID, and how should we approach them?
I think the biggest challenge post-COVID is going to be the economy and helping people to feel motivated to get up every day and try to create something better. I think people are tired.
It was lagging a bit. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll answer the question from the beginning again.
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay. Can you ask the question again?
Yes. So what challenges do you think we'll face post-COVID, and how can we approach them?
So I think the biggest problem post-COVID is going to be all around the economy, but also around people's motivation to get up and go to work, people's motivation to know that what they do matters. I think people want their day, their time to matter more. And I do think people will, you know, a couple of years will pass and people will forget how they felt during this time, but I'm hopeful that they won't, and that I'm hopeful that things will change. But this continuing change is going to be hard because it's going to put a lot of people in a lot of debt. And it's going to put the government in a lot of debt. It already has. But these systems, these economies are so broken that I think the only thing we can do is have a hard time.
Yeah.
Everyone has to be willing to do that. And I don't think a lot of people will be willing to do that. And that's going to be polarizing, complicated, cause new problems, divide people more, and then I hope continue to bring people together. I mean, it's just so complicated.
Yeah. Definitely. I think, yeah, we'll definitely have to face a lot of complicated things, and debt is something that I think a lot of people are thinking about right now. And so what advice could you offer to people to take action during quarantine so they can be better prepared for some of the, the post effects or the life post COVID?
I think there's a few tips I would have. People talk about their goals in this way, you should make SMART goals. And I could give that speech. A lot of leaders could give that speech. But what I would say is think about your life vision and the legacy you want to create. And so that attracting money or creating wealth or creating any sort of stability in your life is around your understanding about what you stand for and what you want to create in your life. So, Carol, you and I might have completely different values and completely different life legacy goals, and that's okay. But it's so helpful if I understand what you're trying to get to. Generally, someone once said something to me about a river flowing, and that you can either go with the river as it flows, or you can hold on to the nearest rock for dear life. And I think the river is flowing and it's flowing pretty hard. Yeah. And we're not going to necessarily be able to control the direction of the water.
Yeah.
But if we kind of know that we're hoping to end up at the pretty park at the end of the river,
yeah.
It's this hope and vision of something to work towards, something ahead of you. Yeah. Finding that hope in the mess, and look for smart ways to stay out of debt. I know there's a lot of it's a vicious debt cycle, but this Marie Kondo movement of cleaning your stuff and living more minimally and being, practicing gratitude for what you have. Simplicity is a beautiful thing, and our society doesn't honor it enough. So consider a tree your best accessory. There's so much beauty in this world. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but that's what's helped me, is just like, how can I find that tree? How can I find that river and find the vision and clarity in that?
Definitely. I think what you said is really inspiring, and really looking at what your why is, like you said, because that's what's going to keep you going, to be honest. Not everything is going to be, money driven, like you said. But thank you so much for contributing towards this topic and for taking time to come out to speak to us.
It's my absolute pleasure. I was just going to say, Carol, that you had mentioned that, or maybe it was Husnash, that I'm telling you about challenges that are personal, and I'm telling you about challenges that are professional. The overlap is we can't deny that overlap anymore. For so many years, you leave work at work and you go home and you leave home at home. That's not the way of the world anymore. And see what happens next.
Yeah,
definitely.
So true.
All right, you guys, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoe. We really appreciate you coming out, sharing your experience. I believe it's really going to make an impact, and hopefully the audience has taken, some notes and some of the
I'm
advice.
Available. You can, the best place to connect with me is LinkedIn, and I love learning and meeting people. So You know, I don't have to agree with everything everyone says, but I feel like life is an opportunity to collect as much information as possible from these fascinating people all around the world. And that's like my tree. All the people that I can still learn from. That's my tree. That's all I want, is to just keep sucking in the learning. So I'm here for it, everyone. And I hope you are too, because like, don't hold on to the rock. Go with the flow of the river.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye, guys.
Okay, so we'll get started. So first, we'd like you to introduce yourself and give like a small bio, who you are, what you do. Yeah.
So my name is Secorro Green, and I work for the Department of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of California Office of the President. And as I&E specialist, I support OP's I&E department, and what we do is convene system-wide internal and external committees and advisory bodies on innovation, entrepreneurship, and commercialization. And what we do is we develop recommendations, we coordinate funding and partnership initiatives, and one of our aims is really to increase UC's I&E visibility. So we want to support research innovations that come out of campuses and really amplify the impact that we make. And all of this, of course, is to meet our public service mission of improving the lives of Californians and social good.
Explain how you have impacted the community and what you have done so far.
Well, prior to OP, my career was primarily managing programs in grant making, corporate social responsibility, community economic development, education, and public health. And I really think it all does play a role working at I&E, because you do have to be able to understand how each sector works. So of course, I've worked in private sector, nonprofit, third sector, and the government, and it helps to bring that. And of course, there's lots of people at OP who have that sort of cross-sector experience, and of course, we can help to not only educate each other, but really provide an informed perspective on what will appeal to our partners when we develop initiatives. So for I&E, what we really want to do is increase UC's innovation capabilities and create new opportunities for UC community. So just to give you a sense, bit of background, we discussed before, it's the University of California is a really rich ecosystem. So we describe it as an innovation powerhouse. So there's 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 national labs, 4 institutes for science and innovation, which was launched by Governor Gray Davis to really help to tackle the sort of social and economic challenges that we face in California and around the world, and the Division of Agricultural and Natural Resources, which is a division in the University of California, in addition to our 60 incubators and accelerators. So for COVID-19, what we've really thought about in I&E, a lot of it is supporting the campuses and really helping them to do work in tackling the virus, but we serve innovators and entrepreneurs in our ecosystem. So we have a broad definition for UC entrepreneurs, and it's any student, staff, faculty, as well as alumni, and we have 2 million living alumni. So as you can imagine, it gives us a lot to draw on. So we really focus on key areas of expanding the economy, enhancing the quality of life, and democratizing innovation and entrepreneurship. And it is about creating access and social and economic mobility for everyone. And of course, universities provide that opportunity, but as I'm sure you're aware, it's not just about having the degree from the University of California. You have to have a place to plug that into. You need networks, you need resources, you need opportunities. And we are really taking that view because it has been exacerbated from COVID-19. Of course, these social factors were always there, but they've become much more visible. So examples of some things that we're doing is we have looked at how we can provide the expertise. So even though there's lots of strategies and plans in mind, something that we do have very strong presence of at University of California is expertise in medical field, health and life sciences, resilient food systems, social entrepreneurship. So we want to use that to provide an evidence base for whatever social programs are launched in order to support people as we go through all of the impacts of COVID-19. And a lot of it too is research. So there's so much research that happens at the University of California on these issues, but bringing those to the forefront so that when these plans are developed, whether it be by third sector nonprofit organizations or government entities or even the private sectors and their social responsibility, that they're able to look at the root cause and have an evidence to tackle that with their programs. So I'm sure, as you're aware, what's being experienced now by underrepresented minorities such as African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans is increased vulnerability, accessing healthcare, unemployment. Small businesses have been among the most vulnerable, and we know also that smaller businesses tend to be owned by women, underrepresented minorities, and veterans. And so we want to just provide the research as well as focus on the key areas that are really having I don't want to say the deepest impact, but really at the forefront and our immediate needs, but as well can address long-term change. So things such as the digital divide, food security, job security, digital transformation, and all of these things are immediate needs because we have not only working from home, but online learning, virtual doctor visits, and trying to do everything remote. But we want to recognize not only those who are furthest from engaging in that, but those who have innovative and entrepreneurial ideas, but will be shut out because they won't have access to the networks or funding to make that possible. So something that my line manager, Global Head Victoria Slivkoff, is establishing, this will be one of our signature initiatives, is a proof of concept grant fund. And this will be distributed to UC ventures that are on the cusp of commercialization. And they need that sort of extra push to get through the validation process. And we're doing not only the fund, but building that network, just what I spoke about before, because that is really what it's about, being able to have those links and not only to receive funding, but advice on how to commercialize your project. So mentorship and the opportunities to present your idea across different platforms. So through that, we plan to focus not only on those who are furthest from, and we do have some programs already existing on campuses for underrepresented minority groups, veterans, and women, but looking specifically how this fund can help them to progress through the commercialization process, which of course isn't linear, and that's just it. It requires a whole web of network of partners who of course understands those who are furthest from the opportunities. And we want to help those businesses on the path from idea to market. What else are we doing? We are, also this week, well, I guess when this shows, it won't be this week, but on the 24th and the 26th, we're also helping to bring COVID solutions to scale and to market. So we're hosting a 2-session showcase, and 9 UC technologies and solutions are reimagining COVID testing and prevention. And they'll have an opportunity to present to not only people in the UC community, and really it's open to anyone that's accessible on Eventbrite, but potential funders and investors.
So what are some of the challenges that you have experienced because of COVID?
Well, as you can imagine, the university will be going through funding challenges. So I think that will be one of the bigger ones. And of course, having to support the startups. So the startups can be at different phases, right? So there's a lot of phases you go through from idea to commercialization. But with COVID, there can be innovations that aren't as much of a priority, or businesses that have launched, depending on what kind of business it is, they're facing the challenges on how can I reopen safely? How do I have the resources to do it, as well as the expertise and knowledge to know that I'm following the policies correctly? And so I think the challenge now is there's several, but one is to coordinate across the campuses, because there are so many, creative, great leaders here at UC, but unfortunately they don't always have the connections to their campus colleagues so that we can share learning and also share resources. So for example, we had a system-wide, because we do have a monthly system-wide call where everyone across the INE is able to convene. And a couple months ago, someone from the Berkeley Law Center did have a clinic available. And it's not only available in the Bay Area, but it's available in the Valley too. And it's about people knowing where they can refer, because he's setting it up so that people can get that sort of technical assistance and advice, which, as you can imagine, for a small business, particularly if we're talking about the ones that are most vulnerable, meaning veteran, women, underrepresented minorities, or really all minorities in general, but it can be challenging to be able to access that sort of advice and help. So not only legal help, but expertise from, for example, he wants to bring in the architecture department to help with design and interiors for businesses, to help rethink all of these processes and make things safe. So I think that is the challenge, is being able to communicate that in a timely manner and share information so that we are really able to share resources at UC campuses, and also really campuses that run I&E programs, reimagining how they can support small businesses and startups, because that is their remit, of course. They want to see great ideas become successful, link people with not only funders, but mentors. And of course, with COVID, it is about, the priorities of funders have changed, philanthropists and VCs, right? So that's a challenge, as well as if businesses can pivot, because some have, and they are now providing things, services and products that are more applicable to COVID-19. And so they can perhaps do a rapid commercialization, but what about those who don't pivot and perhaps just need to rethink how to create a market for their products? So now in a different stage than where they were before. So, but everyone has been very resilient, to say the least. And I think collaborating in a way that hasn't been seen for, both by necessity, but because we have been building that up at UC over time.
So you've spoken a bit about some of the challenges and touched on actually a few of the positive things that you've experienced because of COVID, with new businesses coming up while pivoting, or changing your processes. So could you speak a bit more on some of the positive things, whether that's how you do things in terms of like maybe coming up with ideas in terms of funding, or things that you've done that you didn't really consider before the pandemic?
I'll have to give you examples of campuses, I'm sure, because I don't think we've done anything at I&E. I mean, I guess we kind of have. So we are, because of COVID, because as I mentioned, we do have we're working on our proof of concept. Well, let me think, there's actually a few different ones. We were, of course, always, our efforts are to coordinate campus I&E efforts and to be the liaison to external opportunities for funding. And so we were working on some things that now have been reprioritized with COVID. So one positive is that we have found more creative ways that we are pursuing now to integrate our mission into COVID. So as I mentioned, I'm trying to think of the best way to summarize what we do. So what we want to do is build partnerships and engage the public, community sector, private sector, including corporations and foundation, to transform the intellectual property and innovation capital of UC. So because we do cover every vertical, we're so large, there is a lot happening, and it can be challenging to prioritize, but with COVID coming, it does give you one vertical and focus and place to put a lot of your effort. So that has been a plus, because it does give us something shared. With so many campuses and institutes and medical centers, it can be challenging at times to find commonality. So that has been a plus. In terms of businesses pivoting, I mean, I have seen stories of UC campuses being able to cross-train staff. So campuses that had a much larger student body during the spring and summer sessions, they've been able to redirect the staff to do other jobs. So that's beneficial in a sense that, of course, it keeps people working, but it also keeps departments from being overwhelmed and is cross-training, and is something that, I mean, I think it's a useful tool that's done in workforce development and upskilling, and really being able to provide skilled, meaningful jobs for staff. That happens ad hoc, but this, of course, has required it. You've seen lots of, what else have I seen? Oh, there's some stories out of Berkeley where labs have been really rapidly stood up so that COVID testing could happen, which then allowed research to happen. So here in the Bay Area, Berkeley, it came out of Berkeley, they are doing testing across 5 counties, and people do the test at homes to really track how and when people test positive, if they can test positive again, looking at really the progress, if you will, of the virus in the Bay Area, and looking across different demographics. And with the students being at home, there have been many as well who've taken the opportunity to use their skills either in graphic design or computer science, or even their relationships with the surrounding communities to identify needs that people need for COVID and set up their own projects, whether that's, I've seen translating documents in languages because there are so many things that are just in English, which then of course isn't accessible to the, I'm sure there's hundreds of languages in California, but they focus on about 6 of the more dominant ones. So making that information accessible, which becomes increasingly important as it is challenging for anyone to discern between reputable news sources and those that aren't so much. So being able to provide those reputable sources as well as research and news in those languages, that's something I believe students have been able to do because they've had different schedules now that they're at home and not able to socialize as much. And as well as researchers whose labs have been closed have then pivoted to provide, what's the one I'm thinking of? Like the 3D printing, yes, so making masks and tools for people in the community, so the essential workers who are still working on campus.
Yeah, I think that's really good because I think with the pandemic and the limitations in terms of movement, people have had to sort of look within their immediate community and find what works for them. And yeah, I think that's
and there's been a need to do that, definitely. And also I think, helping to scale up programs, because there was one, for example, that was reaching out to the elderly and making sure they had groceries and medication, that kind of thing, for people who aren't as mobile. And now even people who were mobile now maybe not so much because of different risks with COVID. So again, because there's been students who are out, they've been able to provide volunteering for that. So so I think it's just people looking for opportunities to assist rather than staying and study as no student wants to do. So experiential learning, that's been very positive.
Definitely. So what other challenges do you think you'll face post-COVID, and how do you think we could approach them? So in terms of
there will be so many challenges. I mean, I think that's really the biggest one we're focusing on I&E, is really that proof of concept stage for innovators. So it's called the Valley of Death because that is where they need the most support. And for years now, that's not really been a place where funders have wanted to invest. It's more the later stage things that you have an idea is going to work, and then you can better plan an exit strategy. So I think now with the funding landscape changing, that's needed more than ever, and for the foreseeable future. So at least for the next year, maybe 2 or 3. And that will be a big change immediately. And then afterwards, I think it's difficult to say. I think it's going to really depend on what kind of policies that we have that not only help startups and small businesses and work to mitigate the divides that we see exacerbated, whether that be along of race or class or region, socioeconomics, family, all of those things play a role. But if we don't take that into account as the policy develops, then those divides will be worse. And then when we come into the post-COVID world, these challenges will be even more difficult. And it does though seem that the service economy will change. So that of course will be a huge thing. But hopefully if we can be optimistic, and if people are able to push for policies that are about building good jobs, bridging the digital divide, providing job security, then homes, because of course homelessness has now come to the forefront again, even though it's always there. Now it's become more pressing an emergency, but policies to build that, then we could come into a completely, different a stronger economy, hopefully that's much more equitable and accessible. So I think it's still a to be determined as that plays out, and how really the government chooses to invest their money, because they're really the partners who will have to lead to decide what the rules of engagement are, so to speak.
Definitely. And so what advice would you offer for people to take action now so they can better prepare?
Oh.
So whether that's in like
Oh.
their organization and so in their various departments, or, you know, in higher education, what are some of the things they could do?
Oh dear, that's a tricky one. I would say if there's opportunities, is this directed to students?
So I would say to like staff, in terms of people who coordinate, because you, in your department, you coordinate resources and things like that for the students' experience, but you could touch on both, I guess.
We coordinate more for the campuses.
Okay.
So we coordinate the campuses, who then in turn coordinate the students, although we do help them, for example, to share learning if they have any shared experiences or programs or successes about how to engage students or manage student programs. So we actually don't do that. But from what I've seen, I could say, so in terms of, oh gosh, I don't know if I have any for staff, because the way funding is going, I just don't know. It looks very challenging, to say the least.
Yeah.
So I think it will be about, and so things are getting leaner, which means you do more. Yeah, actually, I don't have anything for that. But I do have for students, I think you should get experiential learning if that's possible. So because of remote learning, remote working. Well, I guess remote learning too, because you can upskill, but I was thinking more remote working. It has created more possibilities for students, because you see, like any campus, you have students who are from the area, but students who are outside of the area, and then they come to the area to work. So now, though, if there's digital access that can bridge that divide and provide opportunities nationwide, potentially where that wasn't available before, you had to be in person, just because, you know, the technology was always there, right? But our custom is to work in person. People aren't necessarily flexible. So that can provide an opportunity for people to have access to maybe even remote internships that weren't there before. So I think that's something. And on the other side of business, that's something that they should structure to become available. So I don't think that it is considered yet how to onboard people, how to bring in staff that you haven't met, can't interview in person. You would have to take extra measures in order to even set them up and induct them and bring them onto the team. But I hope that is something that people, departments, campuses can explore, and really to provide that opportunities for students and to keep them engaged as well. And even linking, another opportunity to provide links to disciplines that aren't normally part of the INE hubs or incubators, accelerators, to reach out and find creative ways for students to be engaged, who want to learn more about startups or business or enterprise. And I don't know if I have any other advice. And I just suppose flexible working. So I hope that continues as we go forward, and that we are able to not just look at the risk of COVID, but how to make jobs better fit into people's lives, whether that's time-wise or the type of work that you do, whether you're able to work remotely or come into the office. I hope all of that becomes more flexible, not to the detriment of people, because many of us find ourselves working more that we're working from home, but as a way to help work to not be the main focus of your life, for family to be the main focus of your life and your own well-being.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've all sort of realized that, you know, upskilling is important, if anything, you know, thinking differently. For myself, looking into other opportunities, definitely in the digital side, in terms of graphic designing and things like that. So.
Okay, so first we'd like you to introduce yourself, give a small bio, who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Dan Cogan-Drew. I live in Maplewood, New Jersey, in the United States. And a little bit about me. So I was adopted at birth. And so from that perspective, I've maintained a kind of a personal life philosophy that is attributed to a philosopher at Princeton named John Rawls. And the philosophy goes something like this. It's called the veil of ignorance. And the basic idea is it's a philosophy around what should society look like. And the veil of ignorance is basically to say, if you had to pick an organizing principle for the way society should function, you should think about that from the perspective of the unborn, in a sense. Before you arrived into the world, taken at random, you could end up in any role in the world, any person in any situation. And the world you should strive to create would be one in which you would be equally comfortable and happy arriving in any role, because you operate from a veil of ignorance, not knowing where you will land. And for me, that's always had some resonance, because there's been some randomness to how I happen to be where I am and who I am in the world. And that always seemed to me to be a sort of like a good sort of theory of equity and equality to operate from. The other thing to know about me that's related to my career is that I was a struggling reader as a child. I was pulled out of class in first grade and given reading intervention. And that sort of stuck with me as a kind of formative experience, where I was always re-entering the classroom knowing that I had left. And it's sort of like when you join a conversation and someone's just told a joke and everyone's laughing, but you didn't hear the joke. There was a lot of that feeling of like having not been a part of the conversation and feeling very self-aware of that and feeling like I'd been excluded. And so that sort of led me to teaching and led me to a kind of an approach towards education, which is very much sort of inclusively minded, trying to figure out what the obstacles are that may prevent all students from feeling like they're a part of the conversation, and what kinds of solutions could we create to remove those obstacles.
So explain how you've impacted the community and what you have done so far.
So I would say it's more of a kind of what we've done. The organization that I work with and I was co-founder of is called Newsella, and it's a word we invented that was the combination of news and English language arts, ELA. And the original idea of it was to take content from authentic sources, news publications was where we started, and make that, let's say, available to the classroom, or as we would say it, instructionalize it. So you can't always take an article from The Guardian or an article from the New York Times or the LA Times and just bring it into class. Depending on the age level, the reading level, the background knowledge, and the interests of your students, that may or may not work. You may think it's a great article that's highly important and you want them to read it, but it may not be accessible. It may not align to the standards and to your instructional objectives. So the work that our company does is source that content from these publishers, news organizations, as well as other nonprofits, the Martin Luther King Center, for example, and other forms of nonfiction. And then do all the work that teachers would ordinarily have to do to make that accessible. So we take an original article that may have been published at a 12th grade reading level, and we create additional versions of it down to as low as a 3rd grade reading level. And so what that does is multiple students in the same room, same classroom, regardless of their reading ability, can engage and read the same article for the most part, take an assessment that helps them understand and helps their teacher understand what they understood of the article, and then participate in the discussion that ensues on equal footing. The idea being that everyone should read the original. It's not sufficient to stay at the 3rd grade level, but if that's where you are, we would much rather you read the 3rd grade version than find yourself sort of locked out of the discussion. So that's the product that we've created. We launched in 2013, and it's now used by more than 20 million students and 2 million teachers in the US. And we have users in every country.
So what are some of the challenges that you
Excuse me.
COVID?
What are some of the challenges I've experienced with COVID?
Mm-hmm.
So I maybe break that into 2 parts. Challenges professionally and challenges personally. So professionally, I think it's been challenging for us, and probably the same way as it's been challenging for a lot of people, is that we work as a community, we work highly socially, we interact a great deal in person when we're in the office, and that has all gone away, and we're all now remote. I think the hardest part of that has been the introduction of new team members when they join the company. They don't have a shared experience of working face-to-face, developing relationships. And then, for those of us who have worked together, we're now taking that relationship online. For those who are new and who are joining the company since we've been remote as of March, they don't have that shared experience as much. We welcome them and embrace them, but I think it's more difficult because you don't have a common sort of referent, common experience to share. And personally, my mother is 89. She lives in New York City. She has a pre-existing condition as well as being 89, so she's at high risk. She lives by herself. And so supporting her, I'm within travel distance, thankfully, but it isn't always easy to be there. And then we have two boys, my wife and I, a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old, and their learning has been substantially disrupted by COVID in very different ways, based on who they are and their schools and their friends. But that's been difficult, and I think in some of the same ways that a lot of families have experienced.
So what are some of the positive things that you've experienced because of COVID?
I'd say probably the number one thing, and it has several dimensions, but the number one thing that we've experienced that's been positive has been more time. We've just had more time returned to us every day. I don't commute into New York City as I would ordinarily. And so given my commute and the state of infrastructure in this country, that can often take me an hour to an hour and a half each way. It's quite unpredictable. And I try to make the best use of that time, but it's never as productive as I want it to be. Now I have that time back. I have that time to spend with my family, to spend with my community, particularly now, I think, becoming more socially engaged and attuned to what's happening and taking action, and having the capacity to pay attention and to take action has been really good. And then personally, I've just had a chance to exercise more. I've just had additional time, and I can actually get on a stationary bike, that we keep in the basement. So that's kind of been some of the positives.
Great. So what are some of the challenges do you think we will face post-COVID, and how can we approach them?
So yeah, this is an interesting question. The challenges that we'll face post-COVID. When I read this question, I thought to myself, actually, I think most of the challenges that we're facing during this time and are likely to face after this time are actually challenges that pre-existed, and what we're seeing are sort of exacerbation of underlying conditions in our society. And so those problems are, I think that the bad news is that those are very serious problems and that they're not easily solved. The good news is that they're, for the most part, not new. And there is a history, and there is much we can learn from that history that we can use to address this. So a couple of examples of what that looks like in education, for example. So it's estimated that 15% of households in the United States do not have sufficient internet to allow students to complete internet assignments that require the internet. That's as many as 16 million students. So that's 16 million out of 51 million students in the total US K-12 population. That's a little less than a third of students in a community. That's a massive impact. And that is not something, if we don't address that now during COVID, that's a challenge that will linger. So one thing that we can do, the obvious step, would be to increase access to the internet and to devices. Mostly it's about bandwidth. And there is a federal E-rate program that can be used for this. An organization called the Education Trust has partnered with one of the FCC commissioners to propose a solution for using those funds. And I think that's a viable option. There's also a deep problem with representation in the talent pipeline in US K-12 education. More than 50% of students now are not white, but more than 75% of teachers are white. And there's substantial research that shows there's a strong correlation between the expectations for students of color being higher when they have teachers of color than when they don't. You can see a change in the proportion of teachers of color based on the percentage of students in a building of color. So for example, when you have up to 90% students of color, you have close to 50% teachers of color in the building. And that makes a difference. It's still not directly proportionate. So what we need to do is increase the talent pipeline. I think we need to make this, we need to name this a priority, and it can be addressed. We can increase the inclusivity of the recruitment pipeline to be better representative of students. And I think a third item, and I think mostly about education. There's lots of work to do here, but the third item that I would appeal to educators to do is to examine I would say audit their curricular materials for three things. One is inclusivity. Does your curriculum actively seek to include all students in the subject area, regardless of the subject and regardless of the students? Does it foster a sense of competence? How does the curriculum actively ensure that students believe that they can do the work? And then how does the curriculum and your instruction of it actively convince students that this is valuable and that it is worth the time that you're asking them to spend on it? I think those three things, if not done today during COVID, will have to be done after COVID. And especially now during COVID, when students are left to make a lot of decisions on their own, when they're not under the physical supervision of educators, they're more likely to choose things that are Fortnite, gaming, social, non-academic, which is obviously has a place, but we're going to lose a lot of kids to non-academic time, and that's going to exacerbate and compound a difficult situation.
Definitely. So you spoke a bit about some of the actions that people can take to prepare for navigating life post-COVID. You spoke about, helping people access internet, students access internet. Could you give some advice that you could offer people and add on maybe to what you've spoken about in terms of taking action during quarantine so we can be better prepared for navigating life post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of larger theme, I think, is become civically involved, become engaged. And if you are not aware of the issues, study and read, watch, listen, read, however you consume your information judiciously, like with a skeptical eye towards social media, and understand what the levers are that you have to make change. And so one of them, very concretely, I think when you sort of pay attention to various issues, one of them is that, when it comes to access, what we need is federal, in the United States, federal government intervention. This is not something that communities or private enterprise will take up on its own. So the FCC and the E-rate program is something that can be done, but it's not likely to be done. It's a political move. It's not likely to be done unless there is political will, and political will comes from ultimately the people. So if you want to see change, then you have to advocate for the policies that you want changed. And you can be specific. I think it's one thing to say that everyone should have internet, but it's much better to say specifically what you're supporting and what the measure is you're asking your FCC commissioners to approve, and what you want Congress to then enact and fund. It comes down to money, and political will is what drives decision-making around money. Politicians have to feel that they will lose more by not acting. And so it becomes compelling for them to act. That's probably the number one thing. When you're talking about as many as 16 million students who don't have internet access on a reliable basis, that's a crisis. And right now we're depending on that. And so as we head into the school year, I'm extremely concerned about that.
Definitely. Thank you so much for, contributing towards this, this interview and talking about how we can better navigate life during and post-COVID.